Tonight, you find yourself wandering through a medieval kitchen, where the shadows flicker across old stone walls and the scent of fresh-baked rye mingles with wood smoke and just a hint of panic, because someone may or may not have burned the turnips again. Maybe you're listening from a candlelit room in Florence, with the rain softly tapping at the window, or curled up under the heavy blankets of a Paris attic as the city finally goes quiet. Perhaps you're drifting off somewhere in dreamy Bruges or in a farmhouse near the Black Forest, where only the owls know the hour, wherever you are. I'd love to know, so if you're awake in Prague at 2 a.m. or winding down in Vienna just before midnight, drop a comment below with your city and the time. Who else is sharing this late-night medieval snack with us? And if these cozy, slow history stories are just your taste, you can gently nudge that subscribe button, no pressure. Of course, just a silent promise you'll be back for another plate of ancient bread and questionable cheese. Now, breathe in the warmth. Let the candlelight soften the edges of your day, and step with me into a feast of flavors, follies, and a few culinary mysteries from the Middle Ages. You wake before dawn, a thin blue light slipping through the cracks in the shutters. The air in your little room so cool it prickles against your skin as you pull the scratchy woolen blanket higher up around your shoulders. The stone floor, bare and cold, presses against your toes as you swing your feet down, the rough rush mat doing little to soften the chill. The first thing you notice is the scent of breath of smoke and something faintly sweet, drifting up from the main room where the fire never truly goes out, only slumbers in its bed of ash until someone stirs it awake again. You step carefully, rubbing sleep from your eyes, careful not to jostle the wooden chest where your entire wardrobe is stacked, and slip quietly down the narrow stairs, feeling the cold creep higher as you move. The world's so quiet you can hear the wind squeeze through the cracks in the thatched roof, the ancient timbers groaning as if they too resent another day. In the main room, your mother is already crouched by the hearth, poking at the blackened logs with an iron poker. Coaxing a few small flames from the sleepy coals, the old dog, curled tight by the door, thumps his tail once but does not rise. He knows there are still a few minutes before any excitement, such as it is, begins. You move to help, careful not to disturb the earthen floor where last night's crumbs still linger, and your breath plumes in the chill as you lean closer to the fire, the warmth seeping into your cheeks, making your eyes water with the first sharp bite of smoke. In the great pot, suspended above the coals, the morning's meal is already underway, a thin porridge. Just oats and water with maybe a splash of yesterday's milk if the cow felt generous. Bubbles lazily. The scent so familiar, it has faded into the background of your life, more reliable than the sun, more enduring than most of your memories. You can almost taste it before you are handed a wooden spoon, the bowl heavy and warm in your hands, steam rising to your face and making your lips sticky. Sometimes, if the gods or the weather are kind, there will be a drizzle of honey or a sliver of dried apple from the pantry, a treasure so rare that it makes you pause, savoring every bite, rolling the sweetness across your tongue like a secret you're afraid might vanish if you chew too fast. But most mornings, it is just oats earthy, a little chewy, and stubbornly bland. The kind of food that fills you up without ever quite convincing you that you've eaten enough. The sound of the fire lapping at the pot, the slow scrape of spoons against wood, and the gentle murmur of voice, slow and tired form, the background music of medieval breakfast. The air is heavy with the scent of smoke, not unpleasant but stubborn, clinging to your hair and your tunic, to every crack in the beams above your head, so that even when you step outside later, you will carry a piece of this place with you, a smell that is both comfort and confession. As you eat, you watch the light change on the walls, gray yielding to gold, and listen to the first birds as they try to outsing the rooster, which is currently perched on the fence outside, eyeing the horizon like he has important news, but isn't quite ready to share it. There's a quiet competition in every household who will get the thickest part of the porridge, who will find the one stray raisin left from last week's market, who will snatch the heel of the coarse brown bread set aside from yesterday's loaf and dunk it into the hot gruel, letting it go soft and almost sweet. You learn early that fortune is fickle and that breakfast is as much about hope as it is about hunger. Your father grumbles about the fire, the weather, the price of oats, and the dogs snoring. And your mother reminds him, gently, that every year is a lean year. Every morning, a small victory. The little ones squabble over who gets to scrape the sides of the pot. And you sometimes sneak them an extra spoonful, pretending not to notice when their faces light up, as if you've given them gold. Beyond the door, the world is waking up somewhere, a bell rings, muffled and distant. Calling the city to prayer or the fields to labor, the smell of someone else's hearth, someone else's burning breakfast, mingles with the scent of damp earth and the promise of another ordinary day. Your hands are warm now, sticky with porridge and soot, and as you look around the small, smoky room, you realize there is a kind of peace in the ritual, in the sameness, in the small comforts of food and fire and family that will never make the chronicles of kings, but will live forever in the quiet stories told over a bowl and a shared smile. You finish the last bite, scrape your spoon clean, and lick the taste of oats and wood smoke from your lips. The day has begun. The chores are waiting. But for one small moment, you are simply here, wrapped in warmth and the scent of ashes, feeling the weight of centuries settle softly on your shoulders. If you're lucky. There's a crust of bread to tuck into your pocket for later, already going stale, but no one minds. It is the kind of bread that improves with chewing, that makes you grateful for teeth and patience and a good strong jaw. Outside, the sky is pale and wide, the fields shimmering with dew, and you step into the new day carrying the memory of porridge and fire, the simple, stubborn joy of a meal that will not be hurried, not be forgotten, not be anything but exactly what it is. If you ever wondered why so many medieval saints were said to perform miracles with loaves and fishes, you'll understand the answer every time you scrape the bottom of your bowl and wish, just for a second, that someone would drop by with a bit of honey. But as you step outside, the scent of wood smoke clinging to your sleeves, you know that even the plainest meal can feel like a blessing when the world is cold and breakfast is waiting by the fire. You find yourself standing in the half-light of an ancient kitchen, the kind where the air is thick with flour dust, and every surface carries the fingerprints of 1,000 mornings. Your fingers trace the rough-hewn table, grainy with old wood and the scars of too many bread knives, while the air all around you is alive with the sound of kneading, dull thuds, the soft exhale of flour, and the muttered calculations of someone trying to stretch the last handful of barley into something that will last until Sunday. In the corner, a small heap of dark, misshapen loaves cools on a cloth, their crusts uneven, marked with thumbprints and the occasional accidental dent from a child's curious poke. The smell is earthy and honest, a little sour, tinged with the faint tang of last year's harvest and the smoky residue of the hearth. You reach for a loaf still warm, heavy for its size, the color of muddy boots after a long walk in the fields, and break it open. Steam curling up in soft tendrils that smell of yeast, dust, and the hope that nothing went wrong with the starter this week. This is peasant bread, and it knows no pretense. It crunches under your teeth, scattering crumbs across your palm. And as you chew, you taste the stubborn bitterness of rye and barley, the ghost of last summer's drought, a faint mineral note that probably comes from a pebble missed in the grinding. You don't mind. The grit is part of the story, a tiny price to pay for the privilege of having anything at all to eat in a world where every crumb counts. You watch your mother carve off thick slices, stacking them beside bowls of bean pottage and wild greens, feeding a table full of chapped hands and hungry eyes. The bread is meant to last, to fill the belly and slow the ache of hunger through long afternoons of work, if you're lucky. You'll find a rare treat, a smear of lard, a lick of cheese, a sprinkle of salt borrowed from a neighbor who somehow always seems to have just a little more than everyone else. Every so often, a heel of bread vanishes under the table, swiped by the old hound who has survived more seasons than most men you know. He munches contentedly, his eyes half closed, wise enough never to bark for more. You look across the room and see, stacked on a shelf, another kind of bread altogether lighter, paler, almost golden in the late morning sun. These are not for you, not for the family, not for anyone whose boots have touched mud in the last week. These loaves are made with white wheat sifted and milled at great expense, hoarded for the Lord's table or the Abbey's feasts. the sort of bread that is rumored to melt on your tongue and leave your hands clean. Once, at a wedding, you tasted a bite. It was soft, almost sweet, with a thin shell that crackled under your teeth and dissolved into something like luxury, like a secret you weren't quite meant to know. You imagine the great hall, candles flickering, long tables crowded with trenchers of fine bread, honey dripping from silver spoons, and the low, murmured laughter of people whose bellies are never quite empty. For a moment, you resent them, their soft hands, their uncracked lips, the way they toss crusts to the dogs, as if nothing in this world is truly scarce. But then, you turn back to your own heel of bread, dip it into the last of your morning pottage, and chew slowly, savoring the way the hot broth soaks through the crust, turning it into something both sturdy and tender. This bread does not pretend to be anything but what it is: a survivor, a workhorse, the edible backbone of your days. You remember stories, passed down with the same care as a family recipe bread that saved lives in years of famine. Bread that started fights in lean winters. Bread that was blessed, broken, stolen, hidden, and mourned when it was gone. You remember how, when you were younger, you pressed your hands into the dough, feeling the way it stuck to your fingers, stubborn and alive, a promise of sustenance hidden in every sticky handful. You think of monks, their fingers stained with flour and ink, rising before dawn to mix dough in the cold silence of the cloister, baking bread not just for themselves, but for strangers at the gate, for the sick, for the poor, for any soul with an empty belly and a prayer. Sometimes you wonder if the difference between peasant and lord is really just the color of their bread, or if, under the crust, everyone is simply looking for something that feels like home. Outside, the world is brightening, the smell of baking drifting out the window to mingle with the sense of wet grass, new hay, and the faintest promise of rain. The crows land on the fence, eyeing you hopefully, ready to argue over every crumb that falls. You offer them a piece, just to see them hop and bicker. And for a second, you envy their certainty. When they are hungry, they shout, they eat, and the world moves on. You finish your meal, brushing the last crumbs from your lap, knowing that this bread will travel with you through the day, packed into a pocket, shared with a friend, perhaps traded for an apple, or a promise, or a secret too good to keep. You know that tomorrow's bread will taste a little different, and next week's might be thinner, or denser, or burnt, but it will always be here, waiting on the table, stubborn and forgiving, a little miracle disguised as a loaf. As you rise to go, you look once more at the soft white bread on the shelf, remembering its sweetness, and then at your own coarse, honest crust, and you think that maybe the best bread is the one that fills your hunger and fits in your hand, the one that waits for you at the end of every hard day, and never, ever asks to be more than it is. And just like that, with the last bite gone and the world outside calling you back to the fields, you understand why so many prayers end with bread, and why, no matter who you are or where you eat, every meal worth remembering begins with the breaking of a loaf. You crouch by the garden's edge as a gray morning settles over the fields, your fingers stiff from the cold and damp soil clinging to your nails as you tug the last stubborn carrot from the tangle of roots, where it spent all summer hiding from hungry eyes and bad weather. There's a quiet pride in unearthing something, even if it's not much thin, a little crooked, more defiant than sweet, the kind of carrot that's done its best in a patch of ground everyone else forgot about. You rub it clean on your sleeve, studying the pale streaks and brittle hairs, feeling a spark of satisfaction at its orange heart, a promise of flavor lurking just beneath the earth. Someone calls you from the door, the words muffled by the wind and the smell of wood smoke that drifts across the yard, promising warmth and the hope of a meal, even if breakfast was barely more than porridge and last night's dreams. In the kitchen, the fire is awake now, lively and crackling, shadows dancing along the walls as your mother slices potatoes, parsnips, a stray turnip or two, all tumbling together into a battered pot with a splash of thin broth and a pinch of salt that tastes like generosity on a good day and like disappointment on all the others. You drop your carrot in, listening to the thump as it joins the rest, and watch as she stirs, her hand moving in practiced circles, coaxing flavor from scraps and patience from thin air. There's no rush. Everything takes its time in a medieval kitchen, and you learn to wait with your stomach humming, the scents shifting from sharp and raw to warm and sweet as the roots begin to soften, their edges blurring into one another. The memory of dirt fading as the promise of something better fills the air. When the pot bubbles, she lifts the lid, and a cloud of steam escapes, fogging the window and curling around your hair, carrying with it the comfort of vegetables and the whisper of butter, the real prize, saved from last week's churning, a pale gold lump wrapped in muslin. So precious you half expect angels to sing when it's unwrapped. Butter in the Middle Ages is not a guarantee, not even for families with cows. It's the reward for luck and hard work and the kind of weather that doesn't play favorites. A rare treasure that arrives in teaspoons rather than spoonfuls. She cuts a small piece, letting it melt into the pot, swirling into a golden spiral that vanishes almost at once, swallowed by potatoes, carrots, and parsnips eager for a taste of the good life. You watch, transfixed, as everything brightens, the dull root vegetables soaking up the butter like secrets, turning soft, glistening, just a little more hopeful than before. The first bowl is yours, heavy and hot, the steam fogging your lashes as you cradle it in your hands, grateful for the heat and the weight, for the way the buttery broth slicks your lips and coats your tongue with a flavor so rich, you wonder if this is what the nobles taste at their feasts. The roots are tender, but never quite surrender, each bite a reminder of where they came from, earthy, sweet in places, stubbornly bland in others, always with a hint of something wild and unexpected, like a story that refuses to be tamed. You eat slowly, savoring every mouthful, letting the flavors linger, the butter smoothing the rough edges and the root vegetables reminding you that luxury is relative, that the line between feast and famine is sometimes drawn by the thickness of a single potato slice. Your sister snags a carrot from your bowl, her fingers quick and guilty, and you let her have it, knowing that tomorrow's pot will hold something else and the best bites are meant to be stolen. The adults argue softly over what to plant next, what will last through the winter, whose turn it is to watch the cow, and who forgot to dig the onions before the frost, their voices weaving in and out of the meal, grounding you in the comfort of routine and the gentle chaos of survival. Outside, the sky has brightened, clouds drifting apart to let a stray sunbeam catch on the butter's shine. And for a moment, you feel the world expand beyond the garden and the pot, a glimpse of something grand hiding in the ordinary, a luxury born not from wealth, but from making do, from coaxing sweetness out of stubborn ground and coaxing smiles from tired faces. You dip a crust of brown bread into the broth, watching it go soft, watching it soak up everything the roots have to offer. And as you eat, you feel stronger, warmer, a little more certain that you can face whatever the day brings. The last spoonful tastes of butter and hope, and as you scrape the bowl, you hear your mother laugh, a sound as rare as the butter itself, and you know that for this moment, at least, you have everything you need later, when the chores call and the pot is empty and the kitchen cold again. You'll remember the warmth, the taste of buttered roots, and the promise that tomorrow there might be more carrots to dig, more potatoes to scrub, more laughter to steal when the world feels thin. You slip outside, the memory of butter lingering on your tongue, the damp earth pressing against your boots, and as you walk the fields, you think of all the things that grow in the margins, all the small luxuries that turn a meal into a memory, and you promise yourself that you will never take a bowl of buttered roots for granted. Not while there is hunger in the world, and warmth in the kitchen, and hope at the bottom of every pot. You find yourself in the dim heart of the kitchen just after midday. The kind of time when the sun never quite reaches the corners and the air hangs heavy with a mixture of steam and the ghost of yesterday's meals. And you know, even before you sit down, what's waiting for you in the battered old pot above the fire? Soup, if you can call it that. It's not an event in this house. It is a tradition, a ritual, an exercise in making something from nothing and pretending it's enough. Your fingers brush the edge of the table, grain rough and sticky with spills, and you watch as your mother, sleeves rolled to her elbows, uses a long wooden spoon to prod and coax life back into the mixture simmering over the coals. She tips in a handful of wilted greens, a scattering of onion tops, maybe a scrap of pork fat saved from last week's market day. But at the heart of it all, Is yesterday's bread hunks of rye so tough you could use them for fencing? Edges worn sharp from drying overnight above the hearth. It's bread too old for teeth, but too precious for the chickens. Bread that, with a little patience and a lot of liquid, is transformed into something almost comforting. You tear your own piece, fingers cold, and drop it into the bowl, watching it swell and soften, soaking up the thin broth like a memory you'd rather keep hidden. There's a kind of magic in watching hard things turn gentle. A lesson you suspect is not lost on anyone who's made it through more than a few winters in this house. The soup smells of garlic and leeks, of musty cellars and new growth, of a promise made every morning and broken just as often tomorrow. Perhaps there will be more. But today, you make do. The heat from the bowl fogs your cheeks as you lean over it, the spoon heavy and awkward in your hand, and you stir the mixture, chasing the softening lumps of bread around and around until they lose their edges and become part of the broth. Their roughness gone, their purpose changed. You take the first mouthful cautious, because you've learned the hard way that hot soup can betray you and taste the world in miniature, the earth from the roots, the smoke from the fire, the salt from tears and sweat, the faint echo of meat from a time when pigs were not just a rumor. The texture is strange at first, bread turning to pudding, dissolving into something neither solid nor liquid. But as you swallow, you realize it is filling in a way nothing else is, sticking to your ribs and promising, for a moment, that you won't go hungry before nightfall. The sound of eating is everywhere, the gentle clink of spoons, the sighs of those who wish for more but settle for less, the sharp whisper of the wind outside reminding you that not everyone has even this much. You look around and see faces lit by firelight, each with a story written in lines and shadows, each grateful for the chance to eat together, even if the meal is humble and the laughter forced. There is a game, an unspoken challenge to find something to add, maybe a wild herb from the hedgerow, a sliver of cheese hidden for a special day, even a drop of vinegar from the bottom of a dusty bottle, anything to make the flavor change, to give the tongue a reason to be curious. You join in, digging through the crumbs in your pocket, offering up a dried apple slice to share, and for a moment, the taste is bright and new, a glimpse of sweetness in a world built mostly of salt and sorrow. The conversation drifts, slow and lazy, topics changing with the mood weather, neighbors, the price of eggs, the latest rumor about a lord who tried to outlaw onions, and the way bread, when it's soft and warm and soaked through, can make you believe in miracles. Someone tells a story of a feast where the soup was thick with cream and golden with saffron, and everyone laughs, knowing it is just a fairy tale. But the warmth of the tale is enough to carry you through the rest of the bowl. You scoop up the last mouthful, scraping the bottom for the bits of bread that have survived. And as you swallow, you realize you are full not just in your belly, but in your heart, filled with the knowledge that even the plainest meal, shared and savored, can make a day brighter and the world a little softer around the edges. You linger by the fire, bowl empty, watching as someone else refills their own with whatever's left. The bread melting into the broth and the broth melting into memory. The wind rattles the shutters, the dog stretches and groans, and you think, just for a second, that this is what happiness is: a handful of friends, a bowl of soup, and the knowledge that tomorrow, no matter what, there will be another pot on the fire, another loaf drying above the hearth, another story to tell over spoons and steam. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, content for now, and stand to leave the table, feeling the bread settle in your stomach like an old friend who's promised to stay for just one more night. Outside, the sky is growing dark, clouds bruising with the threat of rain. But inside, the warmth lingers, the scent of garlic and onion and wet earth clinging to your clothes, your hair, your skin, and you promise yourself that you'll never look at stale bread the same way again. Next time you see a loaf go hard, you'll remember this moment, the way the soup filled the room with hope, the way a simple meal became a story, the way you felt, for just a little while, that you belonged here, among people who know how to make something out of nothing, who know how to soften what is hard, who know how to laugh at the wind and eat their memories by the fire. You stand at the battered wooden table, elbows dusted with flour and cheeks pink from the oven's heat. and watch as your mother gathers up whatever's left from yesterday's. Supper half a handful of tough rabbit, a bone or two she swears still has a little something on it, a cup of peas shriveled at the edges, a lone carrot that survived the root cellar long enough to start growing tiny, stubborn hares, and a few wild herbs plucked hastily from the garden with more hope than skill. It is not a feast, not by any lord's measure, but in your home. This is the making of a humble pie, the dish of survivors, of cooks who know that nothing good ever goes to waste, and that every scrap deserves one more chance before being surrendered to the dog, or, on dire days, the compost pile. You help to strip the meat from the bones, your fingers nimble, careful not to waste even the smallest sliver, and watch as your mother cuts everything into uneven chunks, tossing it into a big clay bowl with a pinch of salt, a splash of yesterday's gravy, or, if you're unlucky, just water, and a generous twist of pepper, being not so much a seasoning as a small act of defiance, a sign that you still believe in flavor, even if the world keeps handing you cabbage. The pastry is nothing like the golden shells you've imagined from stories about royal banquets. It's a rough mix of barley and rye flour, rolled out thick and tough, more shield than shell. Its main purpose to keep the filling inside and the dirt out. You lift the crust, lay it over the dish, and pinch the edges shut, your nails leaving little moons in the dough. Into the oven it goes well. Not really an oven, more like the hottest part of the hearth. The place where yesterday's ashes still hold the memory of fire. You watch as your mother checks the pie, turning it now and then so it cooks as evenly as a medieval kitchen ever allows. You're hungry. Of course, the smell is impossible to ignore, savory, slightly meaty, with a sharp herbal note and just a whisper of something smoky from the wood. The whole house seems to lean in, noses twitching your father, the neighbors, the old cat pretending not to care, but keeping a wary eye on the edge of the table. By the time the crust is cracked and brown, the family gathers around, drawn by the promise of dinner that isn't just thin soup or porridge. The pie lands with a soft thud on the table, the knife sliding through the thick, uneven crust with a satisfying crunch. Steam billows out, carrying the tangled aromas of meat, root, and a dozen meals past. The scent so rich you almost forget that most of the filling is carrot and hope. Each slice is a little different, some pieces heavy with gravy and rabbit, others mostly vegetable or just crust and broth, but no one complains. Not really, and because tonight there is pie, and pie is a sign that you're not just surviving, but outwitting the day's hardships with a bit of cleverness and a lot of stubbornness. You eat slowly, savoring the contrasts, the chew of the crust, the soft give of peas, the sweet bite of carrot, the satisfying richness of any bite that happens to contain actual meat. And, once or twice, a small, sharp crunch that's probably a bit of bone, but could just as easily be the world reminding you not to get too comfortable. The conversation drifts, who saw the new calf born this morning, whose turn it is to mend the fence, what the miller's wife said about the vicar's bread, and always, the question of whether there will be another pie next week, or if it'll be back to boiled cabbage. The fire pops in the hearth, a welcome punctuation to the meal, and the dog snuffles hopefully under the table, snagging a stray crumb or two. You're content. Not because your full hunger is a loyal companion, but because you're together, sharing food that was almost nothing but now is a meal, something to remember when times are leaner still. Sometimes, when the pie is gone and the plates are wiped clean, your mother tells stories of grand feasts in noble halls, of pies stuffed with doves and venison, seasoned with spices so precious that a pinch was worth a week's wages. You listen, eyes wide, and imagine what it might be like to live in a world where pies are for celebrating, not for surviving, where the crust is light and the filling endless, and nobody ever has to worry about what's left in the larder. Still, there's something proud in your heart as you scrape the last bite from your plate, knowing that tonight's humble pie is more than just a meal. It's proof that you can make joy out of scraps, that you can transform yesterday's leftovers into tonight's comfort, that every crumb matters and every effort counts. You watch your family laugh, the firelight catching in their hair, the crust flaking on their lips, and for a little while, you feel as grand as any lord in his hall, as clever as any cook in the king's kitchen. Tomorrow, maybe, there will be only soup or bread or porridge again. But tonight there was pie, and that is enough to make the world feel a little softer, the night a little warmer, the kitchen a place where anything, even happiness, can be baked into existence. As you help clear the table, licking gravy from your fingers, you can't help but glance at the cat, sitting smug and untouched in her spot on the windowsill, and think, not today. Old friend, not today. You find yourself in the shadowy cool of the pantry, your fingers trailing along the rough wooden shelves where rounds of cheese squat like squat little sentinels, each wrapped in a cloth that's seen better days, each with a scent that ranges from maybe that's all right to absolutely not. Someone open a window. The morning's chores are done. Your stomach rumbles, and you reach for a small wedge of fresh cheese, the kind that never gets a name or a celebration. Just the daily honor of being there when nothing else is. A white block, rough at the edges, slick with a sheen of salt and thyme. You press a thumb into its side, it springs back, just a little. And you remember what your grandmother always said, a cheese should answer you. But never argue. You bring it to the table, knife in hand, and slice off a generous chunk, the blade squeaking as it drags through the damp, crumbly mass. The sound is strangely cheerful, like a shoe on a wet floor or a mouse squeezing through a gap in the door. This is not the cheese of feasts or painted tapestries. There are no marbled veins, no blooming blue rinds, just a soft, bright tang, a scent of fresh milk and the faint memory of the animal that gave it. You take a bite and it squeaks against your teeth, a playful protest, a mild challenge. The texture is both crumbly and elastic, dissolving slowly if you let it, or resisting just long enough to remind you that food is not always about pleasure, but about persistence. You chew, savoring the salt, the hint of wildflowers from the meadow, the ghost of last week's rain, the echo of distant cowbells carried in every mouthful. Sometimes, if fortune smiles, you'll find a thread of chive or a hidden burst of caraway, seed planted there by a creative hand or by accident. It hardly matters. Most days, the cheese is plain, a canvas for whatever else is on hand, a crust of bread, a smear of last year's apple butter, maybe a sliver of pickled onion if the larder is feeling generous. You watch as your little brother pinches a piece from your plate and pops it into his mouth, his face lighting up in surprise at the springy bite. The way the cheese resists and then yields, not quite willing to let go. Your mother laughs, brushing flour from her cheek, and slices another round, dropping bits into a bowl of hot pottage, letting them melt just enough to make the broth creamy, rich, and a little mysterious. In winter, the cheese is tougher, saltier, meant to last through the hunger months. In spring, it is soft and bright, almost a treat, best eaten fresh from the churn with cold hands and high hopes. You think of the work behind each wheel early mornings, aching backs, the endless patience of stirring and skimming, the strange magic of rennet, that mysterious gift from a calf's stomach, and the art of judging curds by eye and feel, not by recipe or measure. There is pride in the cheese, but also humility. It is what you make when you have milk, but no luxury, time, but no money, faith, but no festival. Still, it is food, and it fills you, and it carries the story of your days in every bite. You remember hearing tales of distant lands where cheese is hard as stone, sharp as a knife, aged for years in deep caves or traded at market for a fortune. Wrapped in leaves or dipped in wax, sent to kings and bishops and guests of honor. You can't imagine waiting years for a bite of cheese, or hiding it away in darkness, or refusing to share it with a hungry friend. Here, the cheese is for now, it is for breakfast, lunch, and whatever you can sneak after supper. It is for melting into bread, crumbling into soup, stretching over a rare bit of roasted meat, or, in desperate times, gnawed like a root when all else is gone, the dog eyes your hand, hopeful as always, and you sneak him a crumb, watching his tail thump in gratitude. The old cat, more discerning, sniffs and turns away. She prefers her food less chatty, less squeaky, more likely to run if dropped. You finish your meal, licking the salt from your fingers, Content in a way that has nothing to do with fullness and everything to do with ritual, with the quiet satisfaction of eating something made by your own hands, shaped by your family's patience and the unpredictable blessing of the cow. As the afternoon light fades, you wrap the cheese again, tucking it back onto its shelf, safe from mice and the worst of the heat. It will be there tomorrow and the day after, always changing, always dependable, a humble hero in a world that asks you to make do, to get by, to find joy in small things that squeak back. You close the pantry door, the smell of cheese and old wood lingering on your sleeves, and step outside, ready for whatever the evening brings, sure at least that there will be cheese on the table, no matter what else the world forgets to provide. You rise before the sun has climbed over the rooftops, and after a night when the frost settles thick on the thatch and the chickens grumble in their sleep, your throat is dry, tongue thick, and you realize, long before the world has even thought of warming up, that water is a risky wager, not so much a choice as a last resort. You reach instead for the jug of ale, sitting stout and steady on the kitchen bench, the color of dark honey, with a soft foam clinging to the rim and the faint, pleasant smell of yeast, malt, and 1,000 afternoons spent watching your elders stir and strain and mutter about letting it stand just one more day. This is not the ale of festival halls or kingly banquets, not a potion for raucous celebrations, but the daily bread of thirst, brewed right here in your own yard from barley, wheat, or whatever else escaped the rats and the taxman, with a secret handful of herbs thrown in for luck, bitterness, or just a little taste of something different. You fill a clay cup cool, heavy, rough at the lip and tip it up, feeling the first sip settle in your chest like a sigh, sweet and a little sour, enough to soften the edge of a morning that promises nothing but chores and a sky that can't decide between drizzle or sun. The kitchen wakes slowly, the soft scuffle of feet on the flagstones, the quiet clink of spoons, and in every hand, a mug of ale. Because nobody here is fool enough to tempt fate by trusting the well, unless the fire's been burning half a day and someone with patience has boiled the water into obedience. You look around and see the older ones, your father, eyes still half shut, sipping thoughtfully as if weighing the merits of the malt, your mother with her sleeves rolled, using ale to rinse the last scraps from last night's porridge bowl, the little ones each with a thimbleful, because it builds strength and, let's be honest, there's only so much you can do to flavor oatmeal. The taste is gentle, not strong enough to fog the mind or loosen the tongue, but enough to remind you that you live in a world where luck and water both run thin and you take comfort where you can. In a drink that's safer than the river, cheaper than milk, and, with any fortune at all, still cold from the cellar, sometimes. When the weather is fair and the chores are light, the ale is lively, bubbling a little in the cup, with a tang that dances on your tongue and leaves you feeling almost festive. Other days, after a long week and too much stretching of the brew, it's flat, sour, or thin, and you drink it anyway. Grateful for the sharp, honest taste of barley and the quiet confidence that it won't carry the memory of the last cow that wandered through the village well. You remember stories of towns where the water turned wicked, where fever spread through careless cups, and the only cure was to brew, to stir, to trust the wisdom of old women who knew that a good ale was worth its weight in peace of mind. The jug gets lighter as the morning rolls on, passed from hand to hand, poured over stale bread to make a sort of soft, comforting mess that sticks to your ribs and tastes faintly of malt and hope. In the fields, you carry a flask tied to your belt, stopping to share with a friend or sip between pulling weeds. The warmth of the drink, a small blessing when the wind bites and the clouds threaten. Ale, you realize, is a companion, steady, undemanding, quietly helpful in a world that rarely offers easy answers. You've watched your mother make it the careful measuring, the patient waiting, the wild hope that this batch will bubble just right and not go sour overnight. You know the pride in a clear jug, the disappointment when a barrel spoils, the quiet joy in the fizz and the nutty scent that means another week's thirst is tamed. Once, you tried the Lord's Ale at a festival strong, spiced, heady enough to make you dizzy and bold, the sort of drink that turns gossip into legend and dancing into mayhem. But that's a rare treat, best left for holidays and stories told by candlelight. For most days, What you have is enough honest ale, brewed at home, poured with a steady hand. Its taste tangled with memory and effort, and the hope that no one's watered it down more than necessary. You share a last cup before setting out, watching the morning light slip across the floor, listening to the distant sounds of the village waking hammer on anvil, rooster crowing, the laugh of someone who's already had too much and will pay for it before noon. You smile, tuck the jug away, and step into the day, comforted by the knowledge that no matter what waits beyond the door rain or shine, feast or famine, old bread or fresh, the ale will be waiting for you at home, a promise that in a world full of gambles, some things can still be trusted, at least until the barrel runs dry. The last sip is cool, faintly sweet, and as you set down your cup, you wonder, not for the first time, how anyone ever thought water alone could quench a thirst as old and stubborn as yours. You stand in the smoky kitchen, the fire just high enough to lick the bottom of the spit, and watch as a single sausage sizzles, spitting tiny sparks of fat into the ashes below, its meaty scent curling into every corner of the house and calling every living creature, two-legged or four-legged, straight to the hearth. Meat, here, is not just a meal, it's an event, an accident of fortune, a prize so rare that you almost hesitate to believe it when it appears on your plate. Most days, you know better than to hope the diet is all barley, beans, and bread, with an occasional onion to add excitement. So, when you see meat, you wonder if someone's gotten married, someone's died, or someone's caught the Lord in an uncommonly generous mood. You're not choosy, not at all. If the meat is pork, it's probably been cured to the point of saltiness so intense that your tongue tingles. If it's beef, it's tough enough to build a barn out of, but still worth fighting over, sometimes. If the gods are feeling playful, you get a scrap of mutton that tastes wild and earthy, flecked with rosemary if your garden has survived the goats. The best, though, are the sausage's little miracles of leftovers, scraps and spices mixed together and packed into something so humble you could almost mistake it for peasant bread. Until you bite down and feel that satisfying pop of fat, that smoky, savory rush that makes you want to close your eyes and count your blessings out loud. The dog sits by your feet, tail sweeping the floor, eyes wide with hope, and you can't blame him. Today, you'd beg for a taste too. Someone passes around the sausage, and everyone takes a slice thin, measured, careful not to show too much joy. Because meat is never just about eating. It's about remembering every lean winter and every spring, when the fields yielded nothing but mud and bad tempers. You chew slowly, savoring every fiber, letting the salt burn into your tongue, letting the smoky fat coat your teeth. You hear the stories as you eat of how Uncle Richard swore he once tasted swan at a Christmas feast. How the village priest used to hoard bacon in the sacristy. How, every so often, a feast would break out when the Lord's deer strayed too close to a hungry man with a quiet step and a sharp stick. You laugh, because everyone knows the truth. Meat is a dream, a memory, a rumor passed down in stories and, on the rarest days, in bites. The exceptions, of course, are the days when meat is forbidden, the long gray weeks of Lent, when the church's rules rule your kitchen and your imagination, when every meal is fish, if you're lucky, or nothing but pottage and hope. You groan at the memory, the endless days of herring and dried eel, the taste of river mud that clings to your tongue long after you've left the table. You remember how everyone tries to cheat a little bacon hidden in the cabbage, a sausage slice so thin it might as well be a rumor, the game of seeing how much butter you can get away with before the priest starts sniffing around the back door. You think, too, of the rare feasts, weddings, births, funerals, holy days when the whole village gathers around a spit so tall it seems to reach for the roof beams, when the air is thick with laughter and the promise of real fullness, when the children dance in circles just for the joy of licking the last bits of grease from the empty platter. On those days, the meat is everything roasted, stewed, spiced with whatever the merchant had left in his bag at the last market. There are no rules, only appetite, and for a while, the world seems kinder. You help with the work, plucking birds, cleaning fish, chopping onions until your eyes burn, and always sneaking a taste, pretending not to hear the warnings about spoiling your supper. You learn to be patient, to savor the smell as much as the taste, to appreciate the moments when the meal is more than just survival. But most days, it's not like that. Most days, you make do with bones boiled to the point of disappearance, with the odd scrap of bacon or ham lurking in a sea of lentils and cabbage. You grow strong on hope, tough on habit, and always keep your eyes open for the flash of a butcher's knife, the rumor of a pig killed, the sound of the Lord's cook cursing over a stolen chicken. You remember the taste of meat as a kind of promise that life, sometimes, gives you more than you ask for, that a good meal can make the cold nights softer and the hard days shorter. You finish your slice, licking your fingers, the fat leaving a warm glow in your belly, and you wonder, just for a moment, if tomorrow will bring another miracle, or if it will be back to cabbage and porridge and stories about sausages. The dog sighs, realizing nothing more is coming his way, and you scratch his ears. Sharing the simple truth meat is a gift, a memory, a reason to keep hoping, and you tuck that memory away, holding it close as the shadows grow long and the house settles into the familiar rhythm of ordinary hunger and extraordinary gratitude. You sit by the hearth, knees tucked beneath your chin, and watch as your mother lifts the battered iron lid off yet another pot that's been simmering on the fire since before the crows even thought to wake. The steam rolls out, thick and greenish, wrapping around your head and carrying with it the unmistakable, ever-present, slightly defiant aroma of cabbage. The one thing you know you'll never run out of, even if you sometimes wish you could. If the gods were truly merciful, perhaps there'd be a day when you came to the table and the world did not taste like boiled leaves. But today is not that day. And, let's be honest, it probably won't be tomorrow either. Still, you tell yourself there are worse fates. The pot is full, after all, and there's something to be said for food that fills you up. Even if it doesn't spark poetry, you peer into the bubbling mixture cabbage, always, but also turnip, carrot, a limp onion that has seen better months, maybe even a rogue parsnip if luck has visited your family recently. The colors are soft, muted, as if someone painted the whole meal in a fog, and the scent is both sharp and earthy, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes, your hair, your dreams. You scoop a ladleful into a wooden bowl, the broth splashing your hands and leaving a trace of salt and something faintly sour from the vinegar your father makes in the back shed. The first bite is hot, soft, the cabbage breaking down into tender ribbons, the carrots still offering a little sweetness if you catch them quickly. There's a skill to eating cabbage that you've learned over years. Show to savor the bits that still have texture, how to find the rare lump of pork fat or shavings of ham that sometimes, just sometimes, find their way into the pot when no one's looking. You laugh as your sister makes a face, poking at her bowl as if, through sheer determination, she might conjure up a piece of beef or even a spoonful of butter to melt across the top. The dog sits at her feet, nose twitching, but even he seems a little less hopeful today. Having learned the hard way that cabbage does not share, your mother, however, is undeterred. She tells you that in the city. There are people who dream of cabbage people who've never seen a garden, never felt the pride of pulling a full, heavy head from the earth, the dirt clinging to your boots and your hands. She reminds you, in a tone that brooks no argument, that cabbage is what stands between you and hunger, between your family and the empty bowl. You know she's right. But it's hard to remember in a world full of feasts and legends and stories of markets overflowing with cheese and sausages. All things that come to your house only in stories, or, if you're very lucky, as a rumor carried home from the next village by someone who swears they once tasted a stew with more than 3 ingredients. Still, you try to see the best in it. The broth warms you, seeps deep into your bones, and you eat slowly, letting each bite carry you further away from the cold outside. There's a game you play, one you've perfected over the years. How many different ways can you disguise cabbage before your brothers notice? Sometimes it's chopped so fine it looks like herbs, sometimes shredded and hidden beneath a crust of bread, sometimes spiced with pepper, or, on rare days, with a pinch of mustard seed your aunt sent from the city on festival days. Your mother might wrap the leaves around bits of barley and roast them by the fire, pretending it's a roast worthy of a king. The trick is not to let anyone guess, not to let the magic slip. to let every meal feel like something new, even if, deep down, everyone knows the truth. Your father tells stories as he eats, tales of lands where cabbages grow as big as your head, where clever cooks transform them into feasts with just a little salt and a lot of imagination. You listen, half believing, letting the stories fill the gaps that cabbage leaves behind. Outside, the world is gray and damp, the air tinged with the promise of rain, and the fields stretch away in muddy rows, dotted with green where next year's cabbage already waits. You finish your bowl, scraping the sides for the last bit of carrot, the final shreds of pork, the tangy, warming broth that tastes of home and hard work. There is comfort in repetition, you realize, in knowing what waits for you at the table each day, in the slow, steady presence of a meal that does not try to impress but simply sustains. As you set your bowl aside, you feel the warmth in your belly, the promise that you'll make it through another afternoon of chores and mischief and dreams of something richer. You help with the washing up, the scent of cabbage now clinging to your hands, and you can't help but laugh at your own reflection in the window, hair sticking up, cheeks rosy from the fire, and you wonder if perhaps one day you'll miss these meals, miss the certainty of cabbage and the gentle ritual of eating together, the way the world narrows down to a single table, a single pot, and the people you love most. For now, though, you steal one last bite, tucking a piece of soft leaf into your mouth as you head outside, the taste lingering, the world just a little softer around the edges. And as the day stretches on and you pass the cabbage patch once again, you tip your cap, offer a nod of thanks, and admit, if only to yourself, that life could be much worse than a world full of cabbage, as long as there's always enough to go around. You wander into the kitchen late on market day, the kind of afternoon when the sky hangs heavy and the air inside is laced with hope and the faint scent of last night's cabbage. And you know something special is about to happen, because there's a sense of mischief in the way your mother is bustling around the battered wooden table. She's got apple small, battered, the kind with more spots than shine, rescued from the bottom of a neighbor's basket or plucked from the wild old tree that leans over the edge of your fence. The sort of apples that aren't good enough for a feast but too good to let the birds take. You roll one in your hand, feeling its weight, bruised and imperfect, and watch as your mother sets to work, peeling and slicing, the sweet tart scent of apple drifting through the room, waking up your appetite and making your little brother whine in anticipation. The flour comes out, rough and coarse, mixed with a bit of salt, a splash of ale, and an egg if the chickens have been generous, all whisked together in a bowl that's been used for everything from kneading dough to washing lettuce to holding a litter of kittens. There's laughter as you help, your fingers dusted with flour, a little chaos as the dog noses around for dropped scraps, and the baby grabs a slice of apple and gnaws on it with toothless determination. Then comes the real moment, the oil. Not olive oil, not here, not for you. It's lard, rendered from last month's pig, thick and white, stored in a stone jar at the back of the pantry where the sun can't reach. It's been used before, and it will be used again. Because nothing precious is ever wasted, and everyone knows that the best flavor comes from oil that's lived a little. Your mother drops a test crumb into the pot and it sizzles, bubbling up with a pop and a spatter, the sound of risk and reward in every hiss. You watch as she dips the apple slices in batter, then slides them into the hot fat, and the kitchen fills with the scent of something sweet, something forbidden, something worth waiting for. The fritters puff and brown, the edges crisping, little clouds of steam escaping as the batter sets and the apples soften, and you crowd around, jostling for the first taste. The first bite is always dangerous, too hot. The batter almost burning your fingers, but you don't care. You tear a fritter in half, steam billowing, and pop it in your mouth. And for a moment, everything else falls away. The outside is crisp and savory, the inside soft, sweet, just a little tart. The apple melting into the batter, and you barely notice the hint of last week's bacon, or the way the oil has taken on every meal that's come before. You eat quickly, licking honey from your lips if you're lucky enough to have some, or dusting the fritters with coarse sugar if someone remembered to save a bit from the last fare. Everyone laughs, mouths full, fingers sticky, and even your father, who never smiles at cabbage, grins as he steals a second helping. The baby waves a piece in the air, shrieking with joy, and the dog finally gets a crumb, snatching it from under the table and swallowing it whole, tail thumping like a drum. There is a joy in this, a sense that you are celebrating just for being here, for having made it through another week, for finding sweetness where you can. Outside, the sun dips lower, casting golden light through the kitchen window, turning the batter crumbs into little flecks of treasure on the table. You know, even as you eat, that the oil will be strained and saved, the crumbs fished out and the lard returned to its jar, ready for the next risk, the next feast, the next hungry afternoon. The fritters are gone too soon, the laughter lingering as the plates are scraped and the dog noses around for a second chance. Your mother wipes her hands on her apron, cheeks flushed, and you help clear the table, still tasting apple and honey on your tongue. There are chores to do, wood to carry, water to fetch, but for now, you let yourself linger in the sweetness of the moment, the warmth of family, the hush of a house that has, for once, given you more than just enough. Later, as the evening settles in and the fire burns low, you remember the taste of those fritters, the way the batter crackled and the apple yielded, the sense that for a moment you had everything you needed. You think of the oil, risky and rich, the way it carries the memory of every meal, every celebration, every crumb of joy scraped from the bottom of the pot. You promise yourself that next time, you'll be quicker, that you'll snatch the first fritter, that you'll savor it longer. But you know, deep down, that the real feast is in the waiting, the sharing, the messy, marvelous business of turning scraps into treasure. You slip outside, the scent of apples and fried batter clinging to your hair, the memory of laughter echoing in your ears. And you know that tomorrow there will be cabbage again, or soup, or bread. But for tonight, you've tasted something sweet, something bold, something just a little bit dangerous. And that is enough. You wake just after dawn, eyelids still heavy, and the chill of the stone floor bites at your feet as you shuffle across the kitchen, led mostly by habit and hunger. The sky outside is a thin gray line behind bare trees, and somewhere a rooster crows. But you're not listening for birds. You're listening for the telltale clatter of a barrel being rolled across the flagstones and the metallic snap of a knife prying open the lid. Your mother stands by the window, shoulders wrapped in a faded shawl, already elbow deep in the morning's work. Today, it's herring, hauled from a salt barrel that's older than you are, each fish packed tight, glinting in their briny armor, cold and firm, as if they know what's coming. The air fills with a tang sharp enough to wake even your sleepiest sibling, a mix of sea and smoke, old salt, and the slight sweetness of rye bread sliced thick. Piled in a heap on the table, rough crusts dusting your fingers as you reach for a slice. You tear off a piece, smear it with a dab of coarse mustard, and lay a glistening fillet of herring on top. The fish cool and slippery, the rye dense, almost sour. There is a ritual to this, a comfort in the familiar, the way your mother hums as she works, the clink of the knife against the barrel, the little brother who always tries to trade his fish for a spoonful of honey, which never works, but is always worth a try. The first bite is bracing, a slap of salt and the taste of wind off the North Sea, followed by the slow chew of the rye, hearty and heavy, determined to make you work for every mouthful. You chew, and as the flavors mingle brine, smoke. The earthiness of the bread, you feel yourself waking up, your stomach growling in appreciation. The kitchen fills with quiet talk, the occasional groan from someone who still can't believe herring is breakfast again, and the gentle laughter of your father, who insists that only true champions start the day with fish. You know, even as you eat, that this is a meal for the strong, for people who will spend the day hauling, digging, mending nets, or trudging behind a plow. There is something ancient in the act, something that ties you to generations before, who greeted each day with bread and fish, who knew the value of salt and the promise of a full barrel. You pass the jar of pickles, add a sliver or two, savor the crunch and the burst of vinegar, and try not to think about how long it will be before you taste fresh fruit again. Your mother says you should be grateful. Herring keeps you strong, rye keeps you full, and if you close your eyes, you can almost pretend you're eating at a seaside market, gulls wheeling overhead and the world full of promise. Sometimes you laugh, because no amount of imagination will make the rye softer or the herring less assertive. But there's a pride in this breakfast, in the way it fills you up and sets you right for the day ahead. You listen to stories as you eat how Uncle Tor once caught a herring bigger than his own arm, which no one believes. How the miller's daughter tried to feed the cat herring and ended up with a fishy pillow for a week. How the king himself is rumored to eat fish and black bread every morning to keep his wits sharp. You wonder if that's true, if kings really eat like this, or if their tables groan with sweet rolls and butter. And you tuck the question away for later. You finish your meal, licking salt from your lips, washing it down with a mug of weak ale, the taste of sea and grain lingering, not quite pleasant but oddly satisfying. The table clears quickly, everyone with chores, everyone eager to get moving, everyone resigned to another day fueled by the simplest, sturdiest breakfast around. You help gather up the crumbs, chasing them into your palm for the dog, who loves herring more than any human ever will, tail wagging, nose twitching as he snags the last flake from the floor. There is something almost luxurious in the routine, the certainty that there will always be bread and fish, even when everything else runs out. You watch the light grow stronger in the kitchen, the walls warming to gold, and you promise yourself that one day, if you're lucky, you'll taste fresh butter on your bread, or honey, or maybe just an egg, soft and golden, instead of fish. But for now, you are a champion, starting your day with herring and rye, ready for anything the world can throw at you, weather, work, hunger, or the endless parade of fish that march across your plate, determined to see you through another day. And as you step out into the morning, the taste of salt still tingling on your tongue, you understand why breakfast is the most important meal, not because it's delicious, but because it makes you strong, makes you stubborn, makes you part of a long, unbroken chain of people who knew how to make the best of what the world could offer. Even when that offering smells suspiciously like the North Sea at low tide, you settle onto the worn bench, bowl in hand, watching as the steam curls lazily upward and the pottage inside swirls with a confusion of colors and textures, greens from yesterday's cabbage, soft orange from a carrot that somehow survived the cellar, beans plump and pale, a few yellowed peas that have seen better seasons, and a handful of barley that manages to stick to everything, including your teeth. This isn't the feast of legends. No boar's head wreathed in rosemary, no roasted peacock with a tail fanned wide. Just another meal that begins with a handful of whatever the garden or market could spare, stretched and stirred until it looks like supper. Pottage is comfort and necessity, ritual and monotony. The answer to the question, what's for dinner when no one expects anything better? You dig in, spoon scraping against the rough wood of the bowl, and the first bite is both familiar and unpredictable, sometimes creamy, sometimes chewy, always hot, sometimes flecked with a lucky bit of bacon or the taste of wild garlic if your brother was clever in the hedgerows. There's a special magic in the way flavors meld together after hours over the fire, the roots and beans losing their edges, the broth thickening until it's almost a pudding, the scent so deeply woven into your clothes and hair that you can smell dinner long after the pot is empty. You remember, almost fondly, the little games your family plays, who will find the one piece of meat, who will taste the first hint of spice, who will guess which neighbor's garden donated the turnip. Sometimes you think of the feasts you've heard about, stories whispered over the pottage pot or muttered by traders in the market, tales of banquet halls glowing with candlelight, tables bending beneath golden pies, flagons of wine, and mountains of food no one ever has to share. Your father rolls his eyes at such tales, pinching a bit of bread and dunking it in his bowl, claiming that all the feasts in the world can't beat a good pottage on a cold night. Your mother is less sentimental. She stirs and tastes and corrects the seasoning, always making sure there's just enough salt and just enough hope to go around. Sometimes, you dream of sneaking into the Lord's Hall, peeking through the doors as platters of roasted birds parade past, heads held high, the scent of spice and roasting fat nearly enough to make you swoon. You imagine what it must feel like to eat until you're full, to pick and choose, to taste the world beyond the fields and the pottage pot, to reach for a second helping just because you can. But you know, too, that feasts are rare, even for the rich, and that most days their kitchens are just as smoky, their bread just as hard, their cooks just as tired as yours. There's pride in your bowl, you realize. Pride in making do, in feeding a family on wit and thrift and whatever the garden gods provide. You eat slowly, savoring the way the beans break against your tongue, the little bursts of sweetness from carrot or parsnip, the satisfying weight of barley that settles in your belly, promising enough energy to face another day of chores, another round of laughter, another story told by the fire. The table hums with conversation quiet, easy, the kind that only comes from the certainty that tomorrow will bring another bowl of pottage, different but the same, always changing, never disappointing because it never promised anything more. On special days, there might be a feast, a wedding, a christening, a visit from the bishop or a long-lost cousin with a purse full of coin. Then the whole village gathers, the cooks work for days, and the tables overflow with roasted meat, sugared fruits, honey cakes, butter piled high and melting into fresh bread, wine flowing from jugs that never seem to empty. The laughter is louder, the stories wilder, and for a night. No one remembers the taste of cabbage or the feeling of an empty belly, but when the feast is done, when the last crumbs are swept away, and the candle ends sputter in the cold, you return home, grateful for the memory, but glad for the routine, for the gentle, honest comfort of pottage, for the way it stretches and changes and fills. Even when there's not much to fill, you clean your bowl with a scrap of bread, careful not to waste a single drop, and lean back against the wall, letting the heat of the fire and the quiet of family fill you in a way no feast ever could. Outside, the night thickens, the wind moans through the thatch, and you're safe, belly warm, heart content, a champion of the everyday, a survivor of the humble, a believer in the power of a good pot and the wisdom of keeping a little barley tucked away for tomorrow. If someone asks you what you ate, you'll say pottage, with a grin and a shrug, and let them guess whether you feasted or made do, because in the end, it's all the same, the miracle of a meal pulled from the dirt, the luck of a full bowl, and the hope that, tomorrow, the pot will be waiting, ready to begin again. You come in from the fields with mud on your boots and the smell of damp grass clinging to your skin, the light already sinking behind the hills, and you follow your nose to the kitchen where the warmth of the hearth meets you with a welcome that's as much about hope as it is about heat. Someone has been chopping leeks, their sharp green scent curling through the smoky air, and there's a sack of lentils on the table, the little brown grains rattling as your mother pours them into her hand, checking for stones or stowaway beetles, shaking them with a carefulness born of hard winters and long memories. Lentils and leeks, she says, are the food of saints and survivors, the kind of meal that shows up when meat is gone and the garden is stingy. But still there's pride in the way she handles them, as if each one is a coin, a promise, a prayer answered by the land itself. The pot simmers quietly, the broth pale and fragrant with whatever herbs she's found, sage, perhaps, or wild thyme, or just a hint of garlic if the last bulb has held on through spring. You listen to the sound of it, the gentle burble and the occasional spit as a bubble bursts. The kitchen hushed except for your little brother, humming tunelessly as he sets the table, dreaming no doubt of cakes and sausages, not knowing yet how many days you have to fill with beans and patience before another feast arrives. You peel off your cloak, hang it by the fire, and settle on the bench, feeling hunger gnaw at your insides, the anticipation almost as warming as the flames themselves. When your mother ladles out the soup, the color is soft, green-flecked, the lentils still holding their shape, the leeks melting into long, silky ribbons, and you cradle the bowl in both hands, letting the steam clear your head and the aroma fill your nose. The first spoonful is earthy, humble, the lentils almost nutty, the leeks bright and sweet, with a hint of something wild, maybe a turnip or a stray carrot that found its way into the pot. The broth clings to your lips, warm and slick, leaving you with the taste of survival, not celebration. But you eat slowly, savoring every mouthful, chewing the bread your sister passes you, thick slices of rye just beginning to go stale, perfect for soaking up the last drops. Conversation is gentle tonight. Everyone's voice is low, maybe because hunger makes you thoughtful, Or maybe because no one wants to admit they're thinking about butter or bacon, or the rich stews that seem to belong to a different world. Your father says that lentils will keep you strong, and you pretend to believe him. Because in the end, strength is not just about muscle, but about stubbornness, the will to keep going, to find sweetness in what you have, to thank the earth even when she's stingy. You listen to stories of saints who lived on nothing but beans, of knights who ate lentil stew on the eve of battle, of grandmothers who could make a feast from a sack of split peas and a little luck. Someone jokes that you could live on leeks alone if you wanted to win the Welsh Eisteddfod fod, and everyone laughs, even though you don't really know what that is. Only that laughter, like soup, fills the belly in its own way. You notice how the firelight flickers on the bowls, how the steam fogs the window, how the dog rests his head on your foot, eyes half closed, dreaming of richer meals and easier days. You reach for a second helping, grateful that there's enough to go around, and think about the quiet heroism of meals like this, how every mouthful is a small victory, a refusal to be defeated by the thinness of the larder or the length of the fast. The soup thickens as it cools, the lentils breaking down, the leeks dissolving, the last bits of bread soaking up every drop, and you realize that even humble food can become a comfort, a memory, a story to tell on the days when plenty returns. You remember how, last winter, the lentils ran out and you ate cabbage for a week, and how grateful you were when a neighbor arrived with a little sack, a peace offering after a summer quarrel, proof that kindness sometimes comes disguised as dinner. You look around the table and see your family, tired, maybe, but together, warmed by fire and soup and each other's company. And you know that, for all the days when you wish for more, there will be many like this, when enough is a gift, and survival is its own feast. As the bowls empty and the fire burns low, you scrape the last spoonful from the bottom, the leeks now soft and tangled, the lentils gone creamy, the broth tinged gold by the light. You sit quietly for a moment, full in a way that goes beyond hunger, feeling the ache in your muscles ease, the warmth settle in your chest, the ordinary miracle of another meal, another day, another story added to the long, winding thread of survival that links you to everyone who ever sat at a table like this and hoped for better, but gave thanks for what they had. You drift into the kitchen just after sunrise, the mist from the fields still curling beneath the door, and you know today is special because your mother is humming. A real song, not the low notes she sings to herself when the bread goes flat or the beans burn. There, on the wooden table, sits a bowl of cream, pale and thick, freshly skimmed from the morning's milk, the kind of cream that shivers slightly if you tap the edge of the crock, promising miracles for anyone lucky enough to taste it before it's whisked away into some practical purpose. The churn stands ready in the corner, its sides cool and damp, and you watch as your mother pours in the cream, her arms steady, her face hopeful. Churning is always a gamble, sometimes the butter comes easily, separating from the buttermilk in glossy yellow lumps, the paddle thumping cheerfully against the sides. But sometimes the cream simply refuses, staying stubborn and liquid, a promise unkept. Today, though, you have hope. The cow has been grazing in the meadow, the grass sweet with clover, the sun gentle, and even the dog seems optimistic, wagging his tail as if he knows what's at stake. You take your turn at the churn, arms working slow and steady, feeling the rhythm settle into your bones. A song older than the words your mother sings. The kitchen fills with the sound of effort. Creak, splash, thud, the cream growing thicker, heavier, until at last your mother declares the moment has come. She lifts the lid, peers inside, and there it is, fresh butter, golden and soft, floating in a pool of cloudy buttermilk, a miracle that smells of sunshine and green things and everything you wish for on lean days. You watch as she scoops the butter into a wooden mold, pressing it into a neat pat, scoring the top with the back of a spoon, a small design to make it feel even more precious. The buttermilk is saved for soup, or maybe a loaf of rye bread, and you get to lick the paddle. The taste so rich and clean that for a moment you forget every other meal this week. The first slice of buttered bread is a revelation, warm, thick, the butter melting into every crevice, shining in the morning light. You savor it, Let the fat coat your tongue, the salt tease your lips. The bread's coarse crumb, softened by luxury you've almost forgotten. Your siblings crowd close, reaching for their share, and even the baby gets a taste. The yellow smear on her cheek, bright as a flag. For a little while, there is peace, the gentle quiet of people who know what it means to wait, to hope, to be surprised by plenty when you least expect it. You know, even as you eat, that these days are rare. Butter is not a certainty but a gift, cream even rarer, and miracles come mostly to those who work hardest, hope longest, and stretch every crumb and drop as far as it will go. Your mother tells stories as she works, of the time the cow dried up and the only butter in the house came as a gift from a neighbor, of feasts where the cream was whipped into clouds and served with honey and wild berries, of years so lean the churn sat empty for months, its wooden heart dry and silent. You listen, torn between gratitude and longing, and promise yourself to remember the taste, to hold onto it for the days when bread is dry and butter nothing more than a memory. The sun climbs higher, warming the flagstones, and the butter is tucked away in the cool shade of the pantry, wrapped in clean muslin, safe from flies and greedy fingers. Later, there might be a little left to melt over turnips or a spoonful whisked into pottage, but for now, you are content, lips glossy with cream, the world sweet and golden, every worry softened by fat and the memory of singing. The churn is washed, the buttermilk poured off for the hens, and the kitchen settles back into its quiet, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the hum of a happy family. You help with the chores, the taste lingering, and everywhere you look, you see the traces of small miracles, a fresh egg in the basket, a handful of wild strawberries by the path, a loaf of bread that rose high and round despite the cold, you think. As you carry water from the well, that life is made up of days like this, work and waiting, disappointment and hope, and sometimes, if the world is kind, the occasional miracle in a crock on the kitchen table. As evening falls and you settle in with your family, you promise yourself to remember, to be grateful, to share the story of the butter and the cream and the song your mother sang, so that when tomorrow comes and the bread is dry again, you'll have a memory to soften every crumb, a little gold in your heart, a taste of hope to see you through until the churn sings again. You wake to the distant clang of church bells and the sound of laughter floating in from the lane, the kind of morning that carries a whiff of promise, as if the world itself has remembered to be generous for once. The whole house is alive with excitement. Your siblings rush past in a blur, shoes polished, faces scrubbed, each clutching a sprig of wild flowers or a bit of colored thread. Everyone hoping to catch the first sweet treat of the day. You know it's a festival. The kitchen smells different, full of bright, golden hope and the deep, heady scent of honey bubbling in the pot, making the air feel thick and sticky. There's flour everywhere, dusted across the table and tracked in messy footprints along the flagstones. Your mother stands at the center of it all, sleeves rolled high, her hair escaping in wisps around her face, moving with a purpose that speaks of pride and a little bit of magic. She's making honey cakes, the kind that appear only a few times a year when the larder has given up its treasures, when the bees have been kind, and the baker is feeling bold enough to risk the best of everything flour, eggs, butter, a pinch of spice if fortune has smiled. You help measure the honey, watching as it falls in slow ribbons, sticky and fragrant, catching the light, golden as the festival itself. The dough is soft, yielding beneath your hands as you knead, flecked with shavings of lemon peel or a hint of nutmeg, stirred until your arms ache and your heart is full. Outside, you can hear the village coming alive, fiddles tuning, dogs barking, someone shouting greetings over the fence. Every now and then, a neighbor pokes a head in the window, sniffing appreciatively and dropping off an egg or a bit of dried fruit, a silent trade for a promise of a taste later on. You shape the cakes by hand, patting them into rough rounds, each one a little different, some thicker, some thin, some crumbling at the edges, but all smelling of dreams come true. They bake in the hearth, crowded close, and you watch them rise, faces pressed close to the warm stone, waiting for the crust to brown and the honey to bubble through, the edges going crisp and caramel dark. When at last, your mother declares them ready, you snatch the first one, burning your fingers in your haste, but not caring. The first bite is always magic. The crust shatters under your teeth, sweet and yielding, the center soft, the honey melting into every crumb, a taste so rich and unexpected that you have to close your eyes and just breathe, letting it fill you from the inside out. You eat quickly, crumbs tumbling down your shirt, laughing as your brother tries to sneak a second cake and the baby squeals for another bite, sticky fingers grabbing at anything within reach. Outside, the festival spills into the street ribbons and banners, music and the stomp of dancing feet. The promise of a meal that will not end in hunger. There are other treats, fresh bread, cheese, a rare piece of roast, but nothing compares to the honey cakes. Nothing tastes so much of celebration, of plenty, of a world where for one day, no one has to count the crumbs. You savor every bite, knowing how fleeting it is, how quickly the cakes will vanish and the honey pot will sit empty again, how soon the flour will be rationed and the eggs counted carefully, and the magic of the morning will become just another memory for the long, gray days ahead. But today, you have sweetness, you have joy, you have honey still on your lips and the taste of festival on your tongue, and you dance with your family, spinning in the sunlight, laughing in a way that feels like flying. Later, when the cakes are gone and the sun has slipped low, you sit by the hearth, licking the last of the honey from your fingers, your belly full and your heart lighter than it's been all year. You watch your mother tuck the last cake away, a secret for tomorrow, or maybe just for her, and you think about all the quiet work that went into this one bright day, all the little miracles that made it possible, the bees that found the flowers, the baker's patient hands, the neighbors who shared what little they had. You promise yourself you'll remember it. Hold on to the memory when the days grow short and the cupboards thin, when the world feels too small for celebration, because festival days may be rare, honey cakes even rarer, but the taste of them lingers, a thread of sweetness running through every story, every ordinary day, every hope you carry into tomorrow, and as you drift to sleep, the music still playing softly in the night. You know that what matters is not just the feast, but the family that gathers around it, the laughter that echoes long after the last crumb is gone, and the memory of honey cakes golden. Warm, a little bit magical, waiting for you in your dreams. You notice it before anyone else, the jug lighter than it should be as you lift it from its hiding place in the cool shadow behind the bread bin, its sides slick with condensation and hope. You tip it, half expecting the cheerful glug, but all you get is a hollow slosh and the heavy dread that means the ale has run out. And it's not even midweek. You try to make the best of it, setting the jug down gently as if that will coax another pint from its depths. But there's no magic here, not tonight. The fire is low, the air inside the kitchen thick with the scent of old onions and worn-out shoes. And as you look around the table, you realize everyone is waiting, bowls ready, eyes hopeful. Someone coughs, the kind of cough that signals the start of complaints, and you brace yourself for the inevitable chorus. Is there no more? Your mother gives you a look, somewhere between resigned and sympathetic, as she pours the last watery inch into 3 cups, leaving the rest of you with nothing but the taste of disappointment. You remind yourself that this is just the way of things. Ale is not bread, after all, and sometimes the week is longer than the barrel. Sometimes the neighbors have been too thirsty. Sometimes the brewer's daughter is slow to trade, or the last batch soured in the cask, a casualty of luck and weather and the relentless march of time. The first sip is thin, barely a whisper of malt and hops, and as you chase it down with a bite of dry bread, you wonder how much worse it can get. Conversation turns to water, which no one trusts too risky, too full of secrets, too likely to send you running for the hedgerow when you least expect it. There's a grumble from your father about the old days, when the ale was always strong and the mugs always full. But even he knows it's mostly a story, a memory flavored with nostalgia, and maybe just a little exaggeration. You eat your supper slowly, letting the blandness linger, the pottage a little too salty, the bread a little too stale, everything just a bit less forgiving when there's nothing to wash it down. Someone suggests boiling water with a bit of honey and thyme, the desperate brew of people who still believe in miracles. And for a moment, you almost laugh. But then, your mother starts hunting through the pantry for a forgotten jar of preserves, and the game is on. By the time you've all finished, bellies warm with ingenuity, if not satisfaction. You realize that, even without ale, there's comfort here. Laughter that rings a little louder when there's less to celebrate. Stories that last longer when there's nothing left to drink. The small miracle of family gathered in the glow of the hearth, making do and making merry out of necessity. The dog whines, hoping for scraps, and you slip him a bit of bread. Both of you resigned to dryness, both of you dreaming of a future filled with froth and fizz. Later, when the dishes are cleared and the night grows heavy, you wander outside, the air damp and sweet with the promise of rain, and think about the next batch, the barley that needs malting, the cask that needs scrubbing, the hops strung up to dry by the window. You remind yourself that everything in this life is borrowed, that even the things you love most are only yours until the barrel runs dry, and you make a quiet vow to savor every sip next time, to leave a little at the bottom for luck, to share more freely and grumble less when there's none to spare. Tomorrow, you will set to brewing again, shoulders aching as you stir and strain and hope, breathing in the scent of yeast and warm grain, dreaming of the day when the jug is heavy in your hands and the world feels generous again. For now, though, you settle for the comfort of the fire, the quiet hum of voices, the certainty that empty jugs are a part of living, and that sometimes the best stories are told when the ale runs out, and all that's left is the laughter you make together, the hope you pour into the future, and the knowledge that sooner or later, the barrel will be full once more, and the kitchen will ring with the cheerful clink of mugs and the soft, golden promise of plenty. You step out into the morning, the mist hanging low over the meadow and the dew wetting your ankles as you trudge beyond the cabbage patch, basket in hand, eyes sharp for anything edible that hasn't already been claimed by the birds or the bold old rabbit who lives under the hedgerow. Foraging is not just a chore, not just the work of hungry days when the larder is thin and the market stalls empty. It is a kind of adventure, a treasure hunt, a game played with the seasons and the whims of the wild. And you've become something of an expert at it, knowing just where the first nettles poke through the mud, just when the wild garlic will scent the air, just how to judge if those pale mushrooms under the willow are a treat or a last mistake. The world feels generous when you're gathering greens, the woods and lanes alive with possibilities, chickweed in the shadow of the barn, dandelion leaves bright and bitter beside the lane, the sweet crunch of purslane hidden in the garden's neglected corner. You fill your basket slowly, fingers stinging from nettles, clothes damp and knees muddy, but there is satisfaction in each handful, in the way the colors layer green on green on green, a palette of hope and hunger. Back in the kitchen, you tip your haul onto the table, a riot of leaves and stems, roots tangled and trailing, and your mother clucks her tongue in approval, picking through the pile for anything too wilted or too bold to eat, setting aside a handful of violets for the salad, a bunch of sorrel for the soup, the rest to be tossed into the pottage or fried up with a bit of salt pork if fortune has favored you lately. The smell of wild greens is sharp and fresh, a reminder that food need not come from the market to be worthy, that sometimes the land gives you what you need just for the cost of sore knees and patient eyes. Lunch is a wild affair, a jumble of flavors you've learned to love, nettles with their bite softened by boiling, garlic mustard spicing up the broth, a scattering of tiny wild mushrooms, earthy and faintly nutty. The whole mess topped with a drizzle of vinegar or a pinch of salt if you can spare it. You chew slowly, tasting every corner of the countryside, the bitterness of dandelion giving way to the silky tang of sorrel, the soft crunch of chickweed mingling with the sweet snap of wild peas found climbing the fence. Your siblings eye the pot with suspicion, always hoping for bread and cheese, always disappointed until the first bite, and then even the youngest concedes that hunger is the best seasoning, that wild greens make a feast when there is nothing else to call a meal. The old dog circles the table, hoping for a dropped morsel, but even he seems to understand that today. The green things are precious, not to be wasted on a hopeful nose or a careless hand. You remember the stories told by the elders, of springs so lean that nettles became bread, of times when wild onions and acorns were all that stood between your family and real hunger, of days when the women went out before sunrise and came home with enough to fill the pot and the bellies of a dozen tired children. There's pride in the gathering, in the knowing, in the way your hands move without thinking, plucking only the tenderest shoots, the sweetest leaves, the roots with just enough sugar left in them to give the stew some backbone. Sometimes you find a handful of wild berries, tart and tiny, or stumble upon a patch of wild thyme that turns a humble soup into something almost festive. And in those moments, you understand what your grandmother meant when she said that fortune is not always counted in coins, but in the handfuls of hope the earth offers freely. The meal disappears quickly, everyone scraping bowls and licking fingers. And for a little while, the hunger that gnawed at your belly is replaced by a different sort of fullness, a sense of cleverness, of resourcefulness, of being in league with the land itself. The afternoon drifts by, chores done with a bit more energy, laughter easier, and the promise of another foraging adventure always lingering in the back of your mind, the world a banquet if you know where to look. As evening falls, you step outside, basket swinging at your side, the air cool and bright, the fields alive with the hush of summer. You look back at the house, smoke rising from the chimney, the windows warm and golden, and you think about all the meals made from little more than green leaves and hope, all the days carried on the backs of dandelions and wild onions, and the kindness of an earth that gives just enough, just in time. You tip your head in thanks, a quiet nod to the wild, and head inside, ready for whatever the next day brings, be it cabbage or feast, lean times or plenty, trusting that as long as you have hands to gather and eyes to see, the world will always find a way to feed you. You find yourself awake in the small hours, when the only light in the house comes from the hearth's last flickering embers and the quiet sounds of sleep drift from every corner, the soft wheeze of your brother, the dog's muffled snore, the gentle creak of old beams settling into the night. Your stomach is not quite empty, but not quite satisfied either, a quiet ache that sits somewhere between hunger and habit. You slip out of bed, feet careful on the cold stones, and make your way to the kitchen where the air still holds the memory of soup and wood smoke, of laughter and the day's last stories. The table is empty now, only a scattering of crumbs, a chipped cup, and the remains of a loaf wrapped in an old cloth, a heel of bread, rough and brown, hard at the edges, the kind you would pass over at dinner, but which now, at midnight, feels like a small treasure. You unwrap it, the crust giving a soft sigh, and cut a thin slice, the blade catching on the grain, sending a few more crumbs dancing across the table. You chew slowly, letting the taste fill your mouth, the bread cool and a little stale, but still rich with the ghost of yesterday's butter, the promise of last week's honey, the faintest trace of wild thyme or caraway that lingers in the crumb. The kitchen is quiet, and you eat alone, but not lonely, warmed by the hush, by the memory of meals shared and hands held, and the soft comfort that comes from knowing there is bread left, even if just a scrap. Sometimes you think the best part of any loaf is this, the part you eat when the house is sleeping, when the world is stripped down to its simplest shapes and the bread becomes more than just food, but a companion, a promise, a kindness offered to yourself in the dark. You think about all the times bread has waited for you on the table, mornings when it appeared toasted and golden beside a bowl of pottage, afternoons when you broke it in half to share with your sister, evenings when you crumbled it into soup, stretching the meal a little further. You remember how, in lean seasons, every crumb was guarded, swept up and saved for thickening stews or feeding the chickens. And in good years, when flour was plentiful and the oven generous, there were new loaves nearly every day, their scent curling through the house, promising that things would be all right. The quiet of the kitchen soothes you, the familiar weight of the knife in your hand, the comfort of the bread against your teeth, the sense that this is how people have lived for centuries, making do with what remains, finding sweetness in small things, never wasting what might be needed tomorrow. You finish the slice and brush the crumbs into your palm, savoring each one, the tiniest last tastes. And you remember how your mother always said that no one ever got rich by throwing bread away, but everyone grew strong by sharing it. Even when there was barely enough, the dog stirs and pads into the kitchen, nose quivering, and you break off a piece for him, watching his tail thump against the floor in quiet gratitude. A simple exchange that feels as grand as any banquet. You sit together in the stillness. Two creatures kept awake by hunger and comfort and the gentle demands of living. And you listen to the wind outside, the whisper of rain against the window, the peaceful breathing of the house around you. You think about the days to come, of gardens to be planted, markets to visit, loaves yet to be baked, and you promise yourself that you'll remember this moment, this midnight peace, this crumb of bread that tastes of survival and quiet celebration. The embers fade to ash, the dog rests his head on your knee, and you gather up the last crumbs, press them between your fingers, and let the quiet kindness of the night settle in your bones. Tomorrow, the bread will be fresh again, the table busy, the kitchen filled with noise and light. But for now, you have this small miracle, this secret meal, this memory to carry you through until morning. And as you rise to slip back to bed, you smile, knowing that the best feasts are sometimes the ones you eat alone, that the kindest gifts are often the smallest, and that in the hush of midnight, every crumb is a promise kept. The kitchen fades into silence, the last crumbs swept away, and the soft glow from the hearth gives way to darkness as the embers shrink and whisper in the ashes. You listen for a while to the gentle crackle, the slow collapse of wood surrendering to time, a lullaby older than words, coaxing your thoughts to drift beyond the edges of the firelight. There is no need now for more stories or explanations, no reason to hold tighter to the world of hunger and feast and midnight bread. You let yourself settle into the quiet, letting the hush of the old house wrap you close, the soft breath of the dog at your feet and the memory of warm bread still lingering on your tongue. And as the last ember winks out and the silence grows, you let the simple kindness of crumbs, of laughter, of family and fire carry you gently onward, wherever dreams are waiting. The story has ended, the jug is empty, the table clear, and only the hush remains, broken now and then by a sigh from the dog or the faint echo of laughter from the festival long past. So, rest easy. And if anyone ever asks you what you learned from a night among medieval kitchens, just tell them this: in a world where kings are crowned and forgotten, the crumb you share at midnight outlasts any feast. And remember, if you're ever given the choice in another life, be the one who bakes bread, not the king who taxes it. Good night, and let the gentle sound of the fire carry you just a little further toward the edge of dream.